Next up, we have from the esteemed T-Mobile Developer Enablement Program and Platform. Lucky to have him here. Came all the way from Bellevue. Let's give it up for Mr. Anup Chathoth. Good, yeah, I got it.
Yeah, good job. The hardest part is always getting the last names right? Thanks, Evan. Nice to be here. Good to be part of ClueCon for the first time. Hopefully, this will be a continuing tradition for T-Mobile. So always excited and happy to be working with the SignalWire folks here, and then Tony and team. Really excited to actually cook up some interesting things with them too in the coming months and years. Actually, T-Mobile is an investor in SignalWire, and one of the reasons, I guess, is because they got magenta in their logo. But apart from that, I think it would be great to actually kind of also get to meet you, all of you. And then this is more than, I hope at least, this turned to be a conversation more than me coming up here and say, like, this is what we do, right? So thank you. Before I get going, I was kind of hoping to actually give you an overview of, like, why T-Mobile, what is T-Mobile. Some of you, I'm kind of hopefully, optimistically hoping that you're all customers of T-Mobile. Any customers of T-Mobile here? There you go, a good number, yeah. So you may have heard about us actually speaking a lot about actually 5G is, why 5G network is, what network leadership means to us, and all kind of stuff, right? So only a couple of weeks ago, I think, we have been saying that we are the undisputed leader of the 5G network in the country. But only a couple of weeks ago, I think there was a study that came out that compared 5G networks all over the world. And then T-Mobile came out to be the fastest and most available network, I think, or most reliable network as well among the carriers. What that means is that it's at least in the US, for sure, it's the largest, fastest, and most available network, which means that if you are a T-Mobile customer, you are more likely to be on 5G network than any other carrier in the network, right? So this is a long way coming for us, because I remember like 5-6 years ago, we were still the underdog, right? We were the carrier that people went because they want to have a value-based. If you're looking for a cheap plan, you go to T-Mobile, right? And you're like, oh, I'm making compromise on the quality. But 5G has actually done for us is that it has actually enabled us to tell customers that you don't have to compromise on quality. You don't have to compromise on quality and value at the same. You can get quality and value at the same time. So we are kind of really proud of actually where we are. Of course, one of the big part of that, all of that is actually kind of making sure that we truly deliver the value of 5G to customers. I was just talking to one of the folks here, and then he was like, "Hey, I'm not sure, right? What really 5G delivers for customers or businesses, consumers, and so on." I don't know how familiar you are about 5G networks and so on, but there are kind of three foundational value props that 5G was supposed to deliver, right? One of them is, of course, the enhanced broadband speed. Which means that 5G is actually going to deliver like 10x the speed that you normally expect to get from a cell network, right, in the 4G world. You can actually kind of see that being a very useful thing, both uplink and downlink, right? Like if you're doing video streaming or if you're doing high payload services like cloud gaming. On the other side, you also have the whole idea that it actually provides you much lower latency than you can normally get from a old network, which means that if you are actually, for example, sending control signals, right, and then you want something to respond to you much at a real-time speed, you can do that over the network, right? So this is very useful, for example, if in manufacturing, robotics, in many cases actually like low kbps, for example, audio streaming applications and so on. And then the third pillar, or the third value prop, actually, it's really founded based on it's actually having massive amount of devices, right? I think we have come to a place where there are more devices, I think, more connected devices on cell networks than actual number of people in the world, which means that we are kind of slowly go into that explosive growth of how many devices are there on the network. So as any good network, I think you should be able to handle like billions of devices on a network. So that's another big value of 5G, right? That you can actually orchestrate services among these billions of devices because, without overcrowding your control plane, as we call it. So the use cases for 5G, that's actually kind of like a really interesting question, because for in the first 1 or 2 years after 5G got launched, people used to make the joke that 5G has one use case, and what is that? It's doing speed test on your phone, because all you could do was actually kind of bring up a browser. That's, oh my God, it's actually hitting 200 Mbps, because so few people were using it, and all you can do was that, right? And then you didn't see a significant improvement in the performance. But over the past year, especially, I think when it comes to T-Mobile, we have actually shown that there are real use cases behind it, right? There are actually people getting value out of it, right? This is one of the things that actually propelled T-Mobile to be that kind of, from the underdog to the market leader too, because we have actually enabled applications for consumers and businesses in that space. There are a couple of good examples. I was kind of looking at it, and like there are too many of them to pick. The first one actually is very interesting, because when 5G came out, a lot of people actually kind of thought that it's going to be an incremental speed improvement, right? And then T-Mobile launched the 5G home internet. I don't know if any of you use it. It's a pretty cool thing. It's almost like a mobile hotspot for your house. And when we launched it, originally it was supposed to be the backup internet, right? Folks who are out there in the countryside who have only DSL and no other broadband connectivity, this could be a good option, right? But it exceeded our expectations, right? If you look at the speed that it delivers, it's almost like actually as good or better than many of the broadband companies out there. So T-Mobile happens to be the 9th, I think, or at least in the one of the top 10 ISPs in the country right now, just propelled by this, right? So that's kind of like really big, one of the big shining moment of actually what this delivers to customers and businesses, because there is a huge business use case also behind it. It's not just a home internet service provider, right? The second one, massive IoT device or connected device out there. So I think Ivan was mentioning, I come from Bellevue, and there is a big wildfire going on there, right? I mean, it's so big that actually my kids cannot go to the soccer games. So one of the companies actually helping fight that forest fire is a company called Pano AI, who happens to be a T-Mobile, a developer in our ecosystem. What they built was a video camera solution with AI embedded in it, so that actually they can take the camera out there and then either attach it to a towers or attach it to a flying machine, and then it will do a real-time analysis of the forest and then figure out is there fire and detect it, or diagnose it actually based on it, so that you can preemptively fight it. So this is a good use case of actually how you're going to see actually more and more connected devices out there, right? So many of them out there who actually want to do analytics on the device itself, but then want to in real time send the data back so you can take proactive actions against it. The last one, which is kind of like, if you have ever followed the 5G hype trend, one of the often mocked story about the 5G hype trend is like, oh, people are going to do remote surgery using network. Like, oh, a doctor will be sitting down in a hospital and then controlling, like a robotic arm that will perform surgery on you. We're not there. I mean, at least not yet. But one of these use cases, I think it's kind of really interesting, because this is a company actually builds audio streaming applications. So one of the use cases is basically a concert where people all will be wearing an earbud, and then you will be listening to music in real time, right? Whether you are in the room or not, and then the audio is streaming live to you. So they want to actually make it as low latency as possible. In fact, they actually ran this test and surveys on a network. They did a concert in T-Mobile headquarters like not too long ago. The audio signal traveled from the stage to the audience so fast that actually it's faster than sound can travel, right? So people were like, oh, shoot, we need to actually slow this down, because we're hearing it actually, and then we're hearing what's going on outside, right? So that's how fast it can go. That's a kind of interesting use case about when you don't have really high throughput demands, how you can actually assure really, really low latency, like almost real-time latency. So what I wanted to say was like, this is real, right? So the network is there, the infrastructure is there, people are actually building solutions. But the most important part of it is that the true value of all of this comes to life and actually kind of become really real for people only when actually developers come into picture, right? And by developers, I mean like anyone who's actually can build these products and solutions. As you can see, actually, the bad news here is that carriers are actually often the barriers in actually making this happen. I don't know if you ever had to interact with a carrier before, but normally it takes multiple phone calls, chats with BDs. Over the past few months, for example, when we're setting up our developer platform, we talked to a lot of developers, and one of the first things they all ask is like, is there a way I can at least get a SIM card and get it activated without talking to 10 BD people trying to sell me something? I'm like in the early stage of prototyping, right? So I don't want to talk to a guy and sign a 10,000 unit rate plan deal or whatever it is, right? Leave me alone, right? Just give me the stuff and I will start building. So the good news for us is that at least we don't call ourselves carrier, we call ourselves uncarrier, so we don't care about the barriers, right? So, but the other interesting piece or revelation I think a lot of these companies are coming is that a lot of the solutions are not going to be built by telcos themselves or even like the big companies like the cloud providers, right? They're going to be built. If you look at the story of how applications for 4G came out, right? I mean, you couldn't imagine actually ordering an Uber car in the street unless you have a pretty good network connectivity out there, and also kind of you have a pretty good location service, right? If you don't have these two pieces, you cannot actually have a service like Uber come into life. So all of this, or any of the streaming applications that actually you can use it on the street and so on, all of them came from very different set of companies, many of them in the smaller scale in the beginning, across multiple verticals. There is no way one company or some of these bigger players in the market is going to actually build those solutions. It's going to be built by developers, right, in the community who are actually kind of thinking of the next best thing. The good news for us here is that I think somehow when we actually built this infrastructure and network and how it works how it should work, it was built in a way so that it should be way more developer friendly, right? There are places where most of the network functions are now softwareized or containerized so that they can be deployed in a way so that actually it works more like a software than hardware switches that's sitting in a rack somewhere. Also, the boundaries between a cloud infrastructure and then the network infrastructure is kind of slowly blending, right? I mean, like you can actually run a workload on a network endpoint or on a cloud infrastructure and then orchestrate between them as you need it, right? This is one of the ways, for example, you can get like more real-time responses to you because you can decide, do I run this on a device, do I run it on a network, or do I run it on the cloud, right? Because if I have a very high workload, but I don't want actually real-time response. The other interesting piece also is to think about is that the architecture agility of it, right? What I mean by that is that in the past, the networks were all best effort, right? You wanted to do something, we'll make our best effort. No SLAs, no QoS, right? But now with 5G and so on, what we can do is to actually, developers can actually spin up a slice or tell us like what kind of SLA you want, what kind of quality you want to set for a particular communication that you're establishing over the network. So all of these pieces, what it means is that it actually is going to give more and more tools for developers to go and build those kind of solutions, right? So that's kind of a fundamental. If this has to really be successful, I think the developers have to actually come, get access to these tools, and then build a solution on top of it, right? That's kind of the whole thing that will truly unlock and unleash the power of 5G. So it's not surprising then that actually a company like T-Mobile, who really wanted to change up the game a little bit and make sure that we do actually go out and engage with the community and enable people to do it, wanted to actually stand up something that helps us do that. So that's exactly what DevEdge does, right? I mean, DevEdge is T-Mobile's both a program, both a platform and a program to enable developers at scale. So we wanted to actually make sure that we enable developers to build the best connected product, right? Whether it's an application, whether it's a device, whether it's a service that they want to build, all of them in the easiest way. You may notice that the verb we use here is actually enable. I have heard so many times, I worked for a carrier before too, is that the moment they actually talk about developers or partners, the next word in that sentence is almost like monetization, right? So they're kind of thinking like, you are my customer, right? No, that's not how we think it, right? I mean, it's more about you are our partners and we're building something together, and then we have joint customers, right? So it's not about us actually trying to sell something to the community out there. It's more about actually us helping you build the right stuff with the right tools from us and kind of creating the feedback loop between us so that we can go and serve and deliver value to customers, right, together. That's kind of the whole angle that we are taking at it, I would say. The mission for DevEdge from that perspective is that how do we actually make it easier, faster, I didn't include cheaper here, but like definitely that too, and better for developers to actually create the solutions, right? One of the ways we jokingly say this, right? One of the key critical currencies for us is not revenue. It's all about actually how much time it will take for it to build that first Hello World app, right? Because we know that we are all, as developers, we're kind of lazy, and we want to actually get there faster and see some results, because otherwise, we lose some motivation. So how do we do that the fastest way, right? And then the lowest amount of effort, the lowest amount of cost it actually takes it, lowest number of lines of code we actually need to do right to get there. That's kind of going to be the key part of it. So to kind of really manifest that, we kind of think of like little bit like 4 pillars of actually, or 4 principles behind it, right? One of them, like I said before, it has to be self-serve. We don't want any of these people to actually call up a customer care number or talk to a BD before they can actually get the core service, like get me a SIM, right? Give me an access to an API. Don't put it behind a paywall, right? This is some of the stuff. Or don't make me, go through like a contract signing exercise before I can actually even know what you guys are offering, right? Make it a self-serve platform and make it a digital platform, make it a developer-first platform in that sense. The second one, I think, is kind of like I said before, it's kind of in the ethos of 5G and so on, but still, if you think about like a lot of these carriers and this kind of all infrastructure, we don't do that, is that our services are not built to be used by developers, right? I mean, they're not, even inside our companies, they're not built as microservices or, modular building blocks. And even worse, they are definitely not meant to be used by external developers, right? How do we actually make sure that these APIs, the services that we want to offer or the capabilities we want to offer are actually built like an, developer-friendly APIs and services? That's kind of like the second piece of it. The third one, as you may very well empathize with, is that it's one thing to actually go out and say that, oh, we have a service, but another thing to say that here are the tools you can use with it, right? I mean, here's an SDK, here's an API, right? You don't need to be a telco expert to actually go and make messaging happen on a network, or calling happen on a network, or connect to a device, or like find the location of a device, right? You also don't have to actually you also don't want to actually kind of go and start up build a hardware from scratch for it to be able to actually do something. You want something that's easily accessible for you, right? Created for you, right? SDKs, right? APIs, right? Developer kits, a very good solid documentation, right? That's all kind of the key part of it too. The last but not least is also kind of like, I think, at least for us from the DevEdge program, it's one thing is very clear to us, right? This is not a us alone game, right? Because if you are building a solution, you're probably going to come to us for one of the building blocks, right? But that's not all, right? I mean, like, T-Mobile is not going to be in the business of actually giving you a payment API, right? You can actually go into Stripe and get it, right? Or if you want to actually kind of go and enable any other service along with us, right? We wanted to actually make it super easy for it to use them, so they kind of work together, right? That's one of the reasons why we are really excited to partner with companies like SignalWire, because it's not, we know our strength and we know what our core value is, but I think we want to make sure that we play nice with the ecosystem and make sure that it's actually easy for people to go and build those stuff. What will you build with us? That's kind of a question I think we cannot answer, right? Like I said before, right? I mean, what solutions or what use cases or what products actually come out of it? That's going to be something that we all want to actually look forward to together. But what can you build with it, right? I mean, what are some of them? We have some hypotheses around it, right? And because to make sure that we talk the right language to the right set of developers, so we have a hypothesis on what those could be. So number one, of course, is like I mentioned before, the connected devices, right? Whether it's a smartphone, a smart home device for consumers, or an enterprise, sensor that actually tracks objects, or whether it is actually a wearable glass, it could be any of them, right? So smart connected devices, that's one big piece of it, right? And it's not just about actually building the hardware and connectivity, but also providing the services to make sure that we can build the best experience with the hardware. The second piece, I think, which may be the most relevant to probably all of you, is that the cloud communication service solutions, right? It means that anything that actually has to talk to telecommunication networks, right? Call, message, in the future video, right? All of those cool stuff that actually needs to be made available and you can build with them. That's a big piece of it too. The third one is really the enablement of digital enterprises. So one of the things that we always see is that if there is a much bigger trend of insourcing of software development that we see in our enterprise customers. What I mean by is that if they want to really be good at actually serving the customers, if they want to really be good at actually making sense of the data they collect from different parts of their organizations, they have to actually build those logic. So how do we enable them to build those logic? How do we make sure that they have the access to the right tools to make that happen? That's a big piece of it too, right? These are kind of some of the foundational stuff, I think. It's definitely not a mutually exclusive group or something, because to make digital transformation happen, many times you use cloud communication service like customer engagement tools, right, for example, right? But these are some of the bigger areas where we feel like there is a lot of actually need and want of some of this kind of building blocks that we are trying to make available. I wanted to actually show you also like how this actually works in action, right? Because it's one thing to talk about, oh yeah, we're making it available, but how does that look in action? So imagine think about the use case I mentioned, or the device I mentioned before, the camera with the AI that can actually detect wildfire, for example, right? How does it look like, right? I mean, if you look at the developer journey of how somebody builds it, usually from the way we have done conversation, it many times takes actually multiple years and then millions of dollars to actually get the first 10,000 units out, right? I can empathize with it. I was a hardware entrepreneur before, so one of the big challenge, and we didn't have to touch telcos. Trust me, that makes it 10x more complex, right? One of the biggest challenges is how much time it takes and how much revenue it takes. And you have no idea how many actually founders or entrepreneurs tell me is that our business case actually dies before we write the first line of code, because we look at actually all the costs involved, all the time it takes, and there's no way we can actually build a runway like that, right? So our goal is to actually shrink that timeline, shrink the effort, and shrink the cost for it to actually build and launch a product, right? If companies like T-Mobile, we want to actually make it possible for having 1 billion device out there, for example, in our network pretty soon, that's the only way to do it, right? That's the way you can actually make that happen. So a typical developer journey, for example, in that context is that I have an idea, right? What do I want to do? I want to actually get a piece of hardware that I don't have to go and build everything from scratch, that's tuned to actually work on a network. So I don't have to figure out, oh, what frequency bands do you guys support? Or, what modem would actually give me the best performance and so on. You need to have that, right? So you need to have a kind of a developer kit where you can actually start writing your application without having to worry about all the nitty-gritties of the hardware. You definitely need to have a connectivity, right? You need to have a SIM, and you don't probably want to actually kind of start paying for it immediately, because you're like, hey, you know what? I'm going to be prototyping for the next 6 months, right? I'm building my first 10 units of sample units to actually go and test and get feedback from customer. How do I do that, right? That's the second piece you're going to ask. And once you get the hardware and the SIM in your hand, like I said before, you probably don't want to actually go and ring up somebody like, hey, can you activate this for me? I have seen like really crazy tools where you have to actually go and sign 10 lines of contracts before you can actually go and hit activate. And you still cannot do that, right? I mean, it's still behind two other walls that you have to climb on top of it. So how do we make sure that you can do that by actually go in a very self-serve way? Go, click, activate, see my device actually connected, see my connectivity is activated, and then get going, right? That's the second piece of it. The third one is actually really like, okay, I have built it. I am actually now able to actually see my device connected to it. Can I write an application on top of it, right? That's what I think comes like, do I have the right SDKs available on the thing? Do I have the right network services? One of the most commonly asked questions, for example, is that, can I actually find the location of the device? Because not every device, especially the low battery power devices, don't have a GPS chip in it, right? Or can I actually find out whether the device actually, how the network is performing, so I can actually control the experience of how much data I'm sending, for example, on the device, right? So there are a lot of actual network services that actually gets bundled with it that you can use to build your application logic. And needless to say, for example, a lot of these use cases also involve sending SMS back and forth, right? Making sure that you can actually communicate with the device. That's another one. That's another one of the services that actually all get bundled with this piece. And then once you actually build and launch a service, again, these services are all kind of self-serve based, right? You can go sign up and use it, right? It's very simple. You don't have to actually pay a dime extra. You get free credits with it and so on. Then finally, once you actually build the product, you want to get it out. Like I said before, if you have ever actually gone through the hardware building exercise, one of the big pieces to figure out is always the certification process, right? How much time it takes and how many millions of dollars it costs. So that's where I think really one of the things that we want to make it easy to. And once you get there, we want to make sure that you can actually control this device more like a software, right? Oftentimes what happened in the past is that you build a device and you ship it out there, it's in the wild, and there's no way for it to easily update the firmware software and know that it's actually working. So be able to do that, right? Build, launch, and manage, right? That's kind of the whole thing. So that enable that end-to-end process, that's one of the big pieces actually kind of really make it work for the IoT devices. So that's IoT is one good example, right? The other piece that we are tackling right now is actually how do we make that, like I said before, one of the second big areas for us is really about the cloud communication piece, right? That's why, we have been working with our good friends here to actually make that possible, right? When we talk about actually cloud communication, we fundamentally believe that the future of telecom is going to be based on cloud communications. There is definitely a convergence, if not a complete migration of actually how people use a lot of the services, right? So when we think about the foundation building blocks of it, there are numbers definitely, right? You need to either buy numbers, or in our cases, we want to actually enable you to use your existing numbers. Like if you're a consumer or business that you already have a rate plans and a SIM card, why can't you use this number somewhere else, right? So definitely that. And there is definitely the CPaaS functionality, the whole voice, text, video, all good stuff there. And then we have the SIP telephony, because there are a lot of use cases where it's a SIP endpoint that you're actually communicating with, right? And then finally, all the value-added services, like AI, ML, text-to-speech, all those kind of cool stuff that you can run once you actually have established the communication channel. So that's what we mean by cloud communicators. How do we make that easy? You know, again, similar to the example I showed about IoT, how do we make that happen for people? And the good news for us is, I think, that given the massive customer base we have both in the consumer enterprise space and the number of other services and capabilities that we can provide, I think if you mix that together, then now you get actually not just what you can do today, but something like more unique, more value delivered to the customers, right? An example, there are a couple of examples I think that has come up in some of this conversation we have with customers recently, right? One of them was like a use case where a customer of a bank is going to the bank and he wants to withdraw some money, and then somehow a fraudster can actually mimic a lot of the behavior. They have like, if they somehow get access to the SMS or email, right, they can actually go and get access to some of this bank account. But what if actually the bank is able to also tell like whether that customer is actually physically present in the bank, right? Can you add location as part of one of the factors of authentication, right? That's a cool way to actually combine different network services to the existing stuff to make something even bigger, better, and more valuable for the customers and the business in this case. Another use case, I think, another kind of cool set of use cases that we have seen oftentimes is that as a customer, I can actually go and access my email anywhere, right? I can go and sign up an email in a browser on my phone device, any device that I have. But imagine your phone, right? You cannot use your phone numbers on your browser, or you cannot use your phone numbers on a second device. Can you receive phone calls on your Alexa device? You cannot, right? So why should we actually limiting ourselves to do that, right? How do we make sure that the telephony service that you get from T-Mobile is not limited to the phone and the rate plan that you have on your device, right? You can use it. And that unlocks a lot of use cases both in the consumer space and the business space, right? These are some cool examples of once you actually kind of connect the power of the cloud communication to the standard telephony services, how do we actually bring them together and then make it even better and nicer? The last thing I think I talked about it, the IoT device and what we're doing with it. One of the things that I'm sure I have one. I always have one in my pocket. It's so small that it's actually hard to remember that I have it, right? So this is like the device I was talking about before. T-Mobile is not a hardware company, but we went ahead and then actually built this piece of hardware because you want to make it super easy, because it's built, you build it once and then you can use it multiple times, right? We build the hardware and the software and the SDK so that you can actually go and build this. And it comes bundled with our SIM, like I said before, and all the cool network service and so on. So that's something you can actually go and do it. I mean, if you, I talked to a few of you, and then you said like you already signed up for it. So we are shipping it end of the month, and the first 1,000 are on us, and I'm pretty sure there are a few still left. So if you are the kind of tinkerer, which I think I saw on the first day many of you are, that's something actually you can go and get started with working with us immediately. Thank you. I think that's all I had. Yeah.